Boa noite a todas e a todos.
Good evening to all. It's an institutional event, so with the ceremony here in the STJ, the Superior Court of Justice, it's purely academic. We don't have a ceremony, we have an event that is academic as well as institutional, so therefore Thank you, Minister. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. We start now with some international seminary for proofs and criminal justice and new horizons for recognition of people. Who's at the table? The table at the National Council of Justice. Roberto Barros. Followed by their excellencies, President of the National Court of Justice and the Federal Council, Minister Justice Herman Benjamin. Vice President of the National Court of Justice and the National Council of Justice, Justice Edson Fachin. State Minister of Human Rights and Citizenship is Mr. Macau Evaristo. State Minister of Justice and Public Safety, Manuel Carlos de Almeida Neto. Interim Minister. Justice of the National Court of Justice, Rogério Schetti Cruz. Auxiliary Judge of the National Council of Justice and Coordinator of the Department of Monitoring Surveillance of the Prison System and Social Educational Measures, Luiz Manfredi. Director and founder of Innocence Project Brazil, Dara Cavalcante. The National Council of Justice thanks the presence of the authorities already and the participation of your excellent Public General Prosecutor, Federal Prosecutor, Minister Justice of the National Court of Justice, Aldeia Saldanha Pinheiro, Palheiro, Sérgio Coquina, and Daniela Teixeira. Justice Márcio Belcampo, Councilors of the National Council of Justice, Cotanda and Choquer. Miss Daniela Mercury, singer, producer, and dancer, ambassador of the UNICEF UN, a member of the ARLIS organization. Dr. Raquel Beldi, General Sub-Prosecutor of the Republic, councilors that acted in the National Court of Justice, magistrates, servers, and servants, and of ladies and gentlemen who are following these through the YouTube channel of the National Council of Justice. The event has as the objective to deepen discussions about the challenges for the qualification of criminal investigation and of the penal proof through the questions that were brought by the recognition of people. And as such, the seminar takes as a starting point the group work for the recognition of people by the National Council of Justice and the TNJ Resolution 484/2022 that tries to advance in the dialogue and joint development of criminal for the national anthem sung by the singer and artist Daniela Mercury.
Boa tarde a todos. Honrado de estar com vocês. Quero cumprimentar todos, do presidente do Supremo Tribunal, Roberto Barroso, o nosso presidente Herman Benjamin, do Supremo Tribunal de Justiça.
Thank you, everyone. I'd like to greet all, and especially our new minister, Makai Evarista, from the Ministry of Human Rights that I work with. I'm also an ambassador of the Human Rights Observatory, working with all of you. And I'm a friend of all here. Have a wonderful seminar.
Plácidas de povo heróico brado retumbante e o sol da liberdade em raios fúlgidos brilhou no céu da pátria nesse instante, se o penhor dessa igualdade conseguimos conquistar com um braço forte. Impossível, ó liberdade, desafio nosso peito à própria morte. Ó pátria amada, idolatrada, salve, salve. Brasil de amor intenso, um raio vívido, de amor e de esperança a terra desce. Sem teu formoso céu, risonho e límpido, a imagem cruzeiro. És belo, és forte, ávido colosso, e o teu futuro espelha essa grandeza. Terra adorada, entre outras mil, és tu, Brasil, ó pátria amada, comigo, os filhos deste sol és mãe, gentil, pátria amada, Brasil, viva a democracia, obrigada pela justiça, faz a democracia ser efetivada.
Falei aquela parte depois e falar que dessas prisões em classe às 19h20.
Para o pronunciamento de
For
abertura,
the opening announcement, Justice Luiz Roberto Barroso has the floor.
Muito boa noite a todos. Eu tenho muito prazer, muita honra,
Good
muita
evening
alegria.
to all. It's with great pleasure and joy that I'm here. I greet this table in the name of my dear President, Antonio Herman Benjamin, and the rest that were introduced. This is an event that is destined to discuss new horizons for the recognition of people. We are therefore operating a plan of penal right, and here we have some of the great people on criminalistics in the country that is represented here by Dora Cavalcanti, and the very important project that is the Innocence project. I'm going to do a very brief reflection here on Brazilian penal right, to treat specifically of the effort that we're making to minimize the risks of judiciary mistakes, of legal mistakes. I'm a defender of a penal right, penal law that is serious, however moderate, and above all, equalitarian. Equalitarian is the hardest part in Brazil. It's a penal law, right, that in my vision is extremely soft on the top tiers and extremely hard on the lower parts. Obviously, it does not seem to me to universalize it to upwards those that are the lower tier. However, the penal right has to be a penal right that is not able just to that doesn't just penalize mostly the poor and therefore also not well defended. So I wanted to show you with a serious way so that we can effectively undertake its main role, which is so that people do not commit crimes, because if they will be punished. Moderate, because there's no point criminalizing poverty, having excess, and equalitarian, so that all can be treated without inequalities founded in richness or how rich someone is. So the criminal justice in Brazil has four main doorways: police, the public ministry, the judicial advocacy that acts with the judiciary. Managed to get really important advances in the structuring and functioning of the public ministry as much as of the judiciary. The public ministry that has huge independence, and a judiciary that is equally independent. Judiciary in Brazil is one of the most independent in the world, especially because of the criteria of selection of the judges. A public competition that is founded essentially in merit, and therefore judges do not owe favors or political indications to no one, and is one of the unique characteristics of the Brazilian system that ensures the independence of the judiciary aside from the administrative and financial independence. And I cannot emphasize this enough. I travel around the world and I verify in countries that do not have these advantages. The system, however, has two pathways that are not well taken care of enough. The entry port, that is through the police, and the exit way, that is the prison system. And so we must invest energy in improving these two moments of criminal justice. In regards to the prison system, the National Council of Justice, in the project coordinated by me, but implemented by Luiz Anfredi, Justice Luiz Anfredi, somewhere here in this table, we've just created, conducted by Anfredi, a very detailed program to face the state of things that are unconstitutional in the prison system by the excess of people entering, because of the bad quality of the places, because of people that remain longer than they are supposed to, and also to release and have the reintegration of these people in society, which is an ambitious and difficult plan that is impossible to solve the problem alone. But we believe, Fred, right, that we're going to manage to have important advances in order to have an idea of how dramatic the problem is. The first time I was having Fred to discuss this prison system plan, I said the first thing that we must have in a prison is hot water, soap, toothpaste, and toothbrushes. That is the minimum human rights. And we said, first there has to be water, right, Minister Justice? So we can have an idea of the extension and depth of the problem with which we're dealing. And the other path, that is what we like us here, which is the police. The police, which are those who conduct the investigation, the judiciary police that conducts the investigation. We've also tried to advance in this. Recently, the Supreme Court made an important decision on judges of guarantees, the National Justice Council, and a resolution that was written by Councillor Rosa Rotunda that approved a discipline for the functioning of the guarantee judges, giving enough time so that the courts can adjust themselves and also wish to fewer people with this changing of the judges of guarantee. And well, we absolutely believe that the country imprisons too many and not well. Almost the entire system of the prison in Brazil has people that are imprisoned because of crimes associated to drug use. But if we look at that, it's not the big drug lords, but rather small or young poor children that are apprehended using small amounts of drugs, which has been taking place for many years without this having any effect on drug traffic, with its unacceptable and inevitable effects on poor societies. And specifically to avoid this of children in the breaches that the Supreme Court established in a very important decision, sometimes not well understood, the quantity that makes a difference between a drug trafficker and that one who has it for their own use, with the idea of minimizing these imprisonments of poor kids, especially most of them for the first time, and that includes them in the prison system.
We have also tried to invite efforts in limiting police authority. And this is a very important action by the Supreme Court that is led by Justice Faquin, my dear friend here, who is also working this fight to contain police violence. We need to also give dignified conditions to the police and train police officers so that we have a truly investigative police and not a violent police that many times enters communities violating fundamental rights. Therefore, criminal law is in the radar of Brazilian Supreme Court, and we are trying to always improve it because we are in a very unequal country, in a very country that fosters crime, but not only that, because poor people also need public security, and this is an area that we need to invest on in Brazil. I think it has been neglected long enough in this country, public security, because we've been traumatized by authoritarian regimes that brought public security as something unimportant, when an efficient and competent public security is essential to guarantee human rights and fundamental rights for all in a country that faces criminality and different types of criminality in different dimensions. We have common criminality in Brazil, which is that one that is scary to us when we go out in the street, which is robbery and rape. We have institutionalized criminality, which is the criminality committed by the state in stealing public money. We have the organized crime, which is growing and extremely worrisome. The role of organized crime and militias, especially in the Amazon, it is a criminality that is associated to illegal mining, the illegal logging. It is a criminality associated to land grabbing, and criminal fires, and that has provoked the tragedy we saw in the country very recently. Fortunately, we had rain yesterday in Brazil, not very well. I'm still waiting for the rain, but we had rain in some regions of Brazil because the fires had devastated the country. And it is in this criminal environment that justice needs to operate. Justice in a democratic society is at the first order. When we don't have efficient criminal justice, we have a lot of corruption on the one hand, and many professional killers on the other. We have in Brazil over 40,000 homicides a year. Therefore, we have more deaths in Brazil than
Esse é um
the
número muito
deaths that
impressionante.
happen
O
in
Brasil
the
tem uma guerra por ano.
awful war that is
Pessoas que
happening in the
morrem
Middle East.
por
Brazil
diferentes
has
tipos
a
de
war,
violência que resultam
the
em
equivalent of a
homicídio.
war
Portanto, nós
per
temos que
year
ser capazes
in
de
terms of
equacionar isso adequadamente.
homicides. So we need to
Porém,
address that.
é preciso punir as
And
pessoas
we also
certas
need to
na
punish the
medida
right
certa.
people
Isso nos
and with
traz
the right
ao nosso
penalties.
tema
And
da
this
conversa
brings
de
us
hoje,
to
que é
today's
precisamente
conversation, which is
evitar
precisely
os
about
erros
averting
judiciários que decorrem
judicial
do
mistakes
reconhecimento
that
equivocado da
ensue
autoria
with
de
the
delitos.
innocent of
E precisamente
identification
para
of the
combater
authors
essa
of
gravação,
crimes.
condenar uma pessoa e
And
absolver uma pessoa culpada já é bastante
absolving
difícil.
someone who's
Nada
guilty
pior
is awful, but
em termos de
nothing is
prestação
worse
jurisdicional
in
de
terms
pagamento
of
de pessoas
judicial
inocentes.
services
E, portanto,
than a
nós
wrongful
temos que redobrar nossa atenção,
conviction.
redobrar os
That's
nossos
why we need
cuidados
to
para
be
que
very
esse tipo de erro
attentive and very
judiciário
careful so
não
that that type
aconteça
of
ou aconteça
judicial
na
mistake
mínima
does not happen
proporção
or
possível.
happens
Por essa
as
razão, o
little as
Conselho Nacional
possible.
de Justiça
That's
editou
why the
a
National
Resolução
Justice Council
484
published
de
Resolution
2022 para impedir que o
484
reconhecimento
to
equivocado resultasse na
prevent
condenação
the
equivocada por erro
misidentification
judiciário das pessoas.
of
Portanto,
authors
a resolução cuida de
from resulting
procedimentos
in a wrongful
probatórios
conviction.
formados por
That's
evidências
why
e que
we always want to be
afastem
based on
fenômeno
evidence
dramático na
and
justiça criminal,
avoid a
que é o
dramatic
racismo
phenomenon
estrutural
in
e como
criminal
ele
justice,
impacta,
which is
sobretudo,
structural
as pessoas
racism
negras.
and
No
how it
levantamento
impacts
feito pela
Black people.
Defensoria
In a
Pública em
research done
Justiça
by
em
the Public
2021,
Defender's Office of
identificou
Rio
que
de Janeiro in
60% dos
2021,
casos de
it was
reconhecimento
identified that
fotográfico
60%
equivocado
of
em sede policial,
misidentification in
60%
photographs,
desses casos,
in
houve
60%
decretação
of
de uma
these
prisão
cases,
preventiva que
there
durou
was the
9
decree of
meses.
a
Porém,
preventive
mais do
arrest
que isso,
that
confirmando o
lasted
que eu acabo
9
de dizer,
months. And this confirms what I just
83%
said.
dos casos de
83%
reconhecimento
of the
equivocado
cases of
recaiu
misidentification
sobre pessoas negras, reforçando a
impacted Black people,
seletividade e o
which
racismo
emphasizes
estrutural
how
do sistema
selective and
penal
how structurally
brasileiro. Por
racist
essa
the
razão,
Brazilian
o
criminal
Conselho
system
Nacional de
is.
Justiça criou
For
grupo
this
de
reason,
trabalho
the
para
National Justice Council
dedicar-se
created
a
a
essa
working
matéria
group
do
to
reconhecimento
deal with the
resultou
identification
nessa
topic,
resolução. O grupo
and
de
it
trabalho
resulted in this
realizou
resolution. The
amplo
working group
diagnóstico
carried
sobre os
out a
principais
widespread
fatores
diagnosis
que
about the
causam a
main
condenação
factors that
de
cause
pessoas
the
inocentes,
conviction of innocent people,
protocolo para o
a
reconhecimento de
protocol for
pessoas
the
em sede
recognition
policial,
for the
projeto de
identification
lei para a
of
reforma do
people by
artigo 226 do
eyewitnesses in
Código
police
Penal,
stations,
publicações
amending
técnicas
Code
e a
26 of the
capacitação
Penal Code,
dos
and the
profissionais
training of
para
professionals
coibirem esse problema que, como falei,
to combat
e o
this
grupo de
issue
trabalho
that, like I
produziu
said, is very
sumário
serious. And the working
executivo do
group
relatório
produced an
final
executive
e
summary
manual
of the final
sobre a
report and a
resolução, explicando
manual
como é
about the resolution
sua
explaining
aplicação.
how it should be
Esses dois
applied.
importantes produtos
These two
asseguram a
important
realização desse
outputs and
seminário
the
são
very
os
holding of
resultados de
this
uma
seminar are the
cooperação
result of
técnica
a technical
firmado entre
cooperation
o Conselho
agreement
Nacional
signed
de
between
Justiça
the
e o
National
Innocence
Justice
Project
Council
Brasil,
and
e o
Innocence
objetivo
Project
é
Brazil,
precisamente o desenvolvimento
which
de ações
has
conjuntas
the objective of
para que
developing
nós
joint
possamos realizar a
actions
justiça
so
criminal
that we
e
can
impedir a
achieve criminal
injustiça
justice and
criminal.
prevent criminal
Portanto, nós
injustice.
procurando
Therefore,
coordenar
we
conjunto de
want to
ações nessa
coordinate a
matéria
set of
para
actions on
enfrentar
this topic
esse
to
problema
tackle these
e deixarmos
issues.
de ser
We will
o
no longer
país
be the
que
country
prende muito
that
e que prende.
arrests many
Portanto,
people
essa é
and
uma
that wrongfully
rápida
arrests
visão
many people.
do contexto geral do sistema de
Therefore, this is
justiça
a rapid
criminal no
overview
país
of the
e
criminal
nossa
justice
especial
system in the country
preocupação
and
para
our specific
evitar erros
concern with
judiciários,
avoiding
especialmente
judiciary
os erros
mistakes,
judiciários
especially
que
judiciary
decorrem
mistakes
do
ensued
reconhecimento
from
equivocado de pessoas.
identification
Queria
of people.
agradecer à professora
I would like to
Dora
thank
Cavalcante e a todos os
Professor Dara
participaram
Cavalcanti and
desse
everyone who
projeto
participated in this
e
project.
esperar que nós
And I
possamos
hope that
ter
we
uma
can
justiça
have a
criminal no
criminal
país
justice in the
capaz de
country
realizar
that is
o seu papel
able to
importante
fulfill
de
its
proteção
important
dos
role
bens
of
jurídicos que
protecting
efetivamente
the
merecem
legal
proteção,
assets that
punição dos
effectively
culpados
deserve
e, em
protection,
nenhuma
the
hipótese,
punishment
punir
of guilty
pessoas
parties,
inocentes.
and under no
Muito obrigado.
circumstance, punishment of innocent people. Thank you.
Agradecemos o pronunciamento do excelentíssimo ministro Luiz
Justice Luiz Roberto Barroso,
E agora
for
passaremos
his
para o momento de
intervention, and
assinatura
we
do
will
documento de
sign
celebração
a
que tem como
celebratory
objetivo
document that
desenvolver
has
ações
as its goal
conjuntas
to
entre o
develop
Conselho
joint
Nacional de
actions between
Justiça
the National Justice Council and Innocence
visando a
Project Brazil,
efetiva implementação dos resultados
aiming
do
to
grupo de
effectively
trabalho
implement the results of
Reconhecimento das
the working
Pessoas,
group
instituído pela presidência do
related
CNJ,
to the
de
recognition of
modo a
people
fomentar e
instituted by the
viabilizar a
presidency
operacionalização das
of
conclusões do
the
GT,
CNJ,
incluindo a resolução
thus
CNJ
implementing
número
the results of the working
484 de
group
2022.
according to Resolution
O presidente do
484 of
STF do
2022. We
CNJ,
now
o
invite
ministro Luiz
President
Roberto
of
Barroso,
the Supreme
e a
Court
diretora fundadora
and
do
of the National
Innocence
High
Project
Court,
Brasil, Dora
the
Cavalcante,
founding
para
director
assinatura.
of Innocence Project Brazil, to sign the document.
Informamos que, por motivo de
We would
agenda,
like to
o
inform
excelentíssimo
that
ministro Luiz
to
Roberto
scheduling
Barroso
conflicts,
precisará ausentar-se
Justice
às
Luiz Roberto
19h20.
Barroso will
E, em
have to leave the
continuidade,
premises at
tem a
7:20.
palavra a doutora Dora
And I pass the
Cavalcante.
floor to Professor Dora Cavalcante.
Boa noite
Good
a todas e
evening,
todos.
everybody.
Eu estou aqui pouco
I am a
emocionada.
bit emotional
Presidente
here.
Luiz Roberto Barroso, presidente
Chief
Herman Benjamin.
Justice Luiz Roberto Barroso, Chief Justice Herman Benjamin. I hope I don't
Esperados da
all of the
advocacia,
protocols that are
mas
expected
é
from lawyers, but
significativo
it is a
efetivamente muito
meaningful
especial
and
para
very
nós
special
do Innocence
moment
Project
for us
Brasil. Eu
at
cumprimento
Innocence
aqui
Project Brazil.
todos os
I would like to
diretores,
acknowledge
voluntários,
all of the
voluntárias do
directors,
nosso projeto,
volunteers
Ministro
of
Barroso,
our
agradeço
project, Justice Barroso,
muito a
and
confiança
thank you so much for the
depositada no nosso
trust
trabalho.
in
Eu
our
queria, obviamente,
work. I would obviously like to
ministro Edson
acknowledge
Fachin,
Justice Edson
ressaltando o
Fachin,
excepcional
also
voto determinante
congratulating him for the wonderful vote that was concluded yesterday and represents a new advance in the case law when it comes to the Supreme Court. I also would like to acknowledge Minister Macaio Evaristo. I wish you very good luck in leading the Ministry of Human Rights, the Executive Secretary, Dr. Manuel Carlos de Almeida Neto, and I'd like to especially acknowledge Justice Rogério Fretti, who was fundamental for the hosting of the seminar and for the many advances that were made. Without your efforts, nothing, none of this would be possible. And last but not least, Dr. Luiz Andrade, we need partnership with the National Justice Council allows us to make important advances, and I will now ask the ceremonial if I should talk about the project now or if I should wait for everyone else.
Então tá bom, obrigada,
After
presidente.
the other panelists, okay, thank you.
Tem a palavra a ministra Macaé Maria
Pass the
Evaristo
floor
dos
to
Santos.
Minister Macaé Maria Evaristo dos Santos.
pouco misterioso. Ele tem vontade
The
própria.
microphone is a bit mysterious. It has its own feel. Good evening.
Maravilha, estou esperando acender uma luzinha.
Wonderful. I'm waiting for
Foi preciso.
the microphone to
Quero
turn on, but I
cumprimentar
think it's on
o
now.
ministro
I'd like
Luiz
to
Roberto
acknowledge
Barroso,
Justice Luiz Roberto Barroso, the Chief Justice of the Brazilian Supreme Court and the National Council of Justice, Justice Herman Benjamin, the Chief Justice of the Superior Court of Justice, the National High Court, and the Federal Justice Council. And in his name, I'd like to acknowledge all other justices, including Justice Edson Fachin, Manuel Carlos Jamida Neto, Dr. Luiz Lanfredi, and also Dr. Dara Cavalcanti for this wonderful initiative, and everyone present here today from the Innocence Project Brazil. I would like to congratulate you for hosting this event and say that it is a topic that is very important and very dear to all of us who act and who defend human rights and democracy. The hosting of the seminar is very important for us, especially because it touches on such an important topic, which is the facial recognition tools that to us, Black people in this country, it has an even more important aspect, considering that in general, technologies, even though many people would disagree, technology is not neutral. Technology brings with it ideologies, prejudices, and assumptions that are present in society. Therefore, they do not escape racism, and this has really been a cause of concern for us in several aspects, in terms of conviction, but also in terms of access. I'll give a very basic example. Imagine being a Black person that is trying to open a digital account, a bank account. It's very hard because our physiognomy is not read by these algorithms. So that reaches in a very impactful manner a certain in the process of criminalization and convictions, but also prevents us from accessing basic citizenship. So this is a very important event, and I will very briefly mention some of our concerns when it comes to the risk of increase in the violation of privacy, intimacy, the use of facial recognition tools, the processing of biometric data like fingerprints, facial characteristics, and even the way we walk, that according to the general data protection law are considered sensitive personnel. And that unfortunately in the use of these technologies are often shared in a way that is not very organized, and we still don't know effectively the reach and who has access to that data, because many times we join a platform and we automatically share that data without us being able to know everybody who has access, and the need of transparency mechanisms in the processing of data. So once again, emphasizing that it is very important for us to look at AI, understand that it has some deficits in terms of guaranteeing transparency, and therefore can and does repeat a discriminatory bias. That's why hosting the seminar, I think, can result in many contributions when we think about this to reflect in a more extensive manner on the use of algorithms when we think about guaranteeing human rights in different fields. So thank you for inviting me. Our team is here and will be participating on the seminar, throughout the seminar. And I'd like to say that our ministry is open to allow. We would really like to discuss many topics with all of you, with the Innocence Project, with the Federal Justice Council. Our doors are open. We already have some meetings scheduled because we need to move forward and strengthen our democracy. And our democracy will the true reality allows everyone is guaranteed balanced and equitable treatment by the systems that we have in our country. Thank you very much for inviting me and congratulations for hosting this event.
Com a palavra, o ministro Edson
to Justice Edson Fachin. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Chief Justices Barroso and Herman Benjamin, Minister Frete, Dr. Dara Cavalcanti, I acknowledge my fellow panelists, everyone present here in this event, and also everyone who organized this event. And very briefly, Chief Justice Barroso and Chief Justice Benjamin, I would like to emphasize how timely this event it is, because this week is the anniversary of the Brazilian Constitution, and it's very important for us to discuss such an impactful topic on the day-to-day of Brazilian criminal justice, that is the reading of evidence and the identification of authors. And in a system that is more based in
optando assim por priorizar a persecução penal de crimes cometidos não raros em via pública e muitas vezes sem violência e em regra por parcelas
for crimes that are many times not violent and committed by vulnerable parts of the population, discussing the burden of evidence is being committed to democratic values. I would also ask your leave to highlight the normative framework that happened with Resolution 484 by the National Justice Council in December 2022. This resolution, as we know, regulates Article 226 and addresses important issues based on research to try and avoid judicial errors that impact, as was said here, most of all, Black people and vulnerable parts of the population.
I also consider, furthermore, any special comment here for being in the house of this National Court of Justice. I consider that the jurisprudence that is taken on by the STJ since 2020 is one of the most relevant civilizatory advances since the redemocratization of Brazil and the getting over the dictatorship and recovering the democratic state in Brazil. It has nothing to do with establishing undue restrictions to police activities and relevant questions of public security that the Brazilian state must undertake. Quite on the contrary, because it is interested to all to have a justice system that is capable of making justice effectively, not just a formal security, but a system that is capable of qualifying itself because with the interdisciplinary knowledge. And here in this event we will debate the subject of fake memories, which has a relevant place and has much to say. And so, through disciplinary knowledge, trying to always find the biggest degree of certainty to emit a condemnation. What happens is that the criminalization of innocence fragilizes the whole apparatus. The judiciary mistake, not very rare, comes followed by structural racism in many cases that I'm sure are also going to be debated here. The mistake legitimizes the police, the concrete possibility of having an inverted process of losing credibility of the law, the norms, and the judicial authorities. So here I stimulate the increase of the practice of crimes, as shows a good part of literature that talks about the construction of the legitimacy in a penal process that is well developed in Brazil by theoreticians and law practitioners and academics in work environments and research in Brazil, as well as we know seminal works of Professors Tom Tyler of the University of Yale and Daniel Melvin from the University of Carnegie Mellon of Pennsylvania, known as people who dedicate themselves to the subject. I would also so to highlight my most sincere recognition to the work of the National Council of Justice in the past few years, and especially Lucian and Floyd, that has been doing an exemplary job, and we hope that will continue with this dedication for much time still. And so the National Council of Justice, in the presidency of Minister Justice Barroso, has been connected with a more democratic justice system, more coherent with the Republican Constitution in these 36 years that have just started, as we very well know. I refer especially to the Council, to the work group that discussed this subject and resulted in the approval of the resolution for the March 484 of 22, that is a very relevant benchmark and that must be preserved. Likewise, we must praise the services given by the academy and civil society in this area, here represented by the Fundamental Innocence Project with Dr. Dora Cavalcanti and the entire team and volunteers. Dedication that never ceased by the advocates, known advocates, as well as lawyers that fight incessantly for justice and try to identify injustices and their due correction. So, talking about Albert Camus, that if the man fails to conciliate justice and freedom, they then fail at everything. Thank you very much, and a great seminary to all.
Neste momento, devolvemos a
At this
palavra ao
moment,
ministro Luiz
the floor
Roberto
is back to Justice Barroso. Just to make a mention, is that he's so zealous about the air conditioning, about expenditure, that he's put the air conditioning at 25, which was so 5 degrees, which was so hot. But that is why I myself have noted the practice of brief protocols without a lot of nominatas, but I could not mention our dear Daniela Mercury that just gave us a really beautiful interpretation of the national anthem. And that has an ambassador for great cause, LGBTQI+, and environmental causes, because this is the planet that we must preserve and save. Since life is not made just of food and art, Daniela is a great symbol in Brazilian art. It's always a joy to have you with us. Thank you.
A ditadura do
Look at
cerimonial.
the dictatorship of the ceremony.
Cortou a minha palavra, eu não pude dar as boas-vindas a ninguém.
My speech, I couldn't say hello to anyone, but everyone is already accommodated. The event has started, and very soon Justice Barroso will have to leave us. And I just wanted to highlight that to the National Court of Justice, this is a very important event. It's important firstly because everything that is organized, inspired by Justice Rogério Schetti is not bad, it's excellent.
Não é exagero nós dizemos que
So it's no exaggeration to say that in Brazil we have a lot of good judges.
mas o melhor mesmo
But the
é quando nós
best
temos
really is when we have
pessoas
good
que
people
são
that are
justas.
judges.
E aqui é exatamente
And this is exactly
como eu vejo e
how I
como nós
see this
vemos.
and how we
Vejo a
see
ministra
Justice Daniela Teixeira,
assentindo, como nós vemos o trabalho
how we
do
see
ministro
as well
Rogério
the work
Schietti.
of
Então, é isso, eu
Justice
agradecimento.
Rogério Schietti.
E também
And
reconhecer
also to recognize that Justice Barros today stayed with us over 45 minutes already. It's really something. If he's not anxious or not, nor is he passing notes to people, which means that he's very happy we're in this environment debating a subject that is so important.
O alvará está concedido
But
para Sua
the
Excelência.
permit, the license to leave is conceded to you, so you can move to your next engagement. And now we're going to continue under the presence of my dear friend, Justice Edsel Fachin.
São duas as ditaduras, do cerimonial e
So
do fotógrafo.
we have here two managers, the ceremonial and the photographers.
Convidaria a ministra que
Photographers.
aqui.
So I'll invite Ms. Daniela to please be here with us as well.
Senhoras e senhores,
Ladies and
agradecemos os
gentlemen, we
pronunciamentos
thank
realizados
the
e com a devida
speeches, and with the due
autorização
authorization, we declare closed this solemn opening ceremony. We will then start the presentation of the teaser of the documentary Reconhecidos or Recognized. I apologize for the teaser of the documentary. So we're going to just have the table organized here, and as promised, we're going to have the presentation by Dr. Dora Cavalcanti. So just that little comment.
Senhoras e senhores, antes do início da aula, essas pessoas.
Boa noite, eu tenho o prazer então de
I have the pleasure, therefore, so now to pass the floor to Dr. Dora, leading notably with the other directors here present, an institution that has been responsible to minimize the suffering of many Brazilians that are either condemned or in prison because of judiciary mistakes, which is within the scenario of recognition of people. So please, so that all can know better, the Innocence Project Brazil. Thank you, Justice. I want to be brief, but I'll tell a little bit of the history of the strategic issue. It is the question of the council that brings us to this seminary. In August of 2018, we had the first victory of the Innocence Project Brazil. Atacino Ferreira de Lima was absolved after a criminal revision judged by the Court of Justice of São Paulo, and after a year imprisoned and 10 years forbidden from having contact with his children. Victims of violence by their mother and not of sexual violence committed by their father. In that case, the main factor that took to his unjust conviction were false accusations. In the next year, in July of 2019, we had the two first cases that were judged from our project that were about the subject of wrong identification. Barbosa de Castro was 5 years in prison, being known as the crazy person in motorcycles, and that was then absolved with robust new technical proof made with images that were taken on TV images. In this case, it was a joint case with the public prosecution in Ceará, where we have an agreement with them that is now signed. In the same month in São Paulo, Igor Marcelo was being freed, a young person that was in prison at 19 years of age because of a illegally made identification while he was bedridden in a hospital receiving medical attention for having been a victim of a weapon that got fired. On the other side of the city where there was a theft. In that case, the absolution only arrived 2 years later when a DNA test was being done that proved young Igor as innocent. It was also in 2019, during an academic meeting that took place in the Faculty of Law in São Paulo, sabotage, with an introduction with the Justice about several subjects that were being put on the agenda of the 6th session of Grand Chamber of this institution. We talked a lot at that time about how fallible human memory can be, about this phenomenon that we know better now, that puts in check the identification of people as an extremely fragile tool, differently from what we thought a proof that faces an almost insurmountable issue of the human brains fixating the images of when a crime is taking place. The most common of them, violence and theft at weapon point. The stress that the victims face combines with low illumination, the use of a cap or a hood, and the same difficulty as Justice Macaé was, the Minister Macaé was saying, they're recognizing the characteristics of very different racial groups, increasing exponentially the possibility of having the identification being a false positive, which is what the Americans call a cross-racial effect. And to all of these factors, add without doubt this component of institutional violence, still guided unfortunately by structural racism that permeates our society. I was there at that event. In that event, the rules and the seed of this construction and of this case law change that was led by Justice Faquin and Your Excellency. We had the opportunity to present in a memorandum. I'm very happy here to see people that participated of the redaction of the writing of this document and decision of several North American courts. It took over 10 years so that a change could take place little by little in that country, Dr. Raquel. Is there also through a very different system, the process was still very slow. And here in Brazil, our country, since the historical day that took place in the habeas corpus 598886 that took on a different size and proportion, that case, Dr. Publicario Alamada partnership with the public prosecution, that case was a habeas corpus of the state of Santa Catarina, who had the opportunity of acting still in the pandemic. It was in October 2020, and from there onwards, many changes took place. I would just like to take the timeline again to say that in December of that year, more specifically on the 24th of December, Robert Medeiros da Silva Santos, who spent Christmas at home after 2 years incarcerated.
And that's when we had a very important innovation. We had been convicted for 2 robberies that happened in the city of São Paulo. He was absolved
uma oportunidade
sob a relatoria do ministro Secretariat under the leadership of Justice Sketchy, after Innocence Project Brazil concluded what we refer to, if you don't know the way we refer to this step as the investigation of a case when the authors, the supposed authors, claim to be innocent. We analyze the case until we reach a robust pattern of certainty of that person's innocence. In August 2021, another victory in the São Paulo court, Michel Alves returns home after 5 years in prison for a violent sexual crime that had also not taken place. In that case, the public prosecution office came to the project saying that the victim had given a testimony apologizing for lying. And in 2021, this court, now under the leadership of Justice Dantas, returned freedom to José da Silva Mendes, an MMA fighter from Rio de Janeiro. And in that case, the evidence was already in the process. There were fingerprints that at the time of a homicide, his fingerprints were identified at his gym, and also did forensic analysis of his Facebook page. And all of that to say about what we're going to discuss tomorrow throughout the are possible and achievable alternatives to improve and evidence presented in common crimes, as Mr. Barroso said, which is the most concerning for Brazilian citizens. In a recent interview, Justice Schiachi highlighted the impact of these changes in a short term, identifying over 400 cases judged by this court following the new understanding that either resulted in absolutions or the reversal of wrongful arrests. But there's still much to be done. Resolution 484 by the National Justice Council perhaps has not yet won over the population's hearts and minds, because we still get many cases like this here at the National High Court. And that is why I see a lot of potential in this seminar, which makes us very hopeful and also fills us with responsibility and motivates us to comply with the agreement that we signed today. We need to overcome former prejudices. We need to reach obstacles through knowledge. We have to recognize how horrible is human memory, and then many times recognizing the wrongful the mistaken identification is not the same as holding the victim accountable. We cannot put the burden of proof on the victim and tell them that if they do not recognize the criminal, nothing will be done in the investigation. Therefore, I have a question. Would the Brazilian population be safer if we continue using such a procedure that is so amenable and susceptible to human error? I don't think so. We have to move on collectively in terms of the selectiveness of the police approaches, including the investigation, carrying out an investigation that is based on solid evidence, and being very careful in analyzing the evidence throughout the investigation, already considering the guidelines provided for the working group under Justice Schiachi's presidency, resulting in the analysis of the habeas corpus absolving of wrongfully convicted people. We have represented all actors in the process that act in these different stages and that I consider to be very engaged. And I have a piece of breaking news here. Last week, we selected a finalist for the Novari Award, a project by the Civil Police of São Paulo, the leadership of the panelists that we have tomorrow, Dr. Jean Paoli, dealing with the critical training of civil police officers to evaluate the identification of victims without influence, and it has already trained over 6,000 police officers. The Public Defender's Office do tireless work, and also the Public Prosecution Office. Here, I would like to highlight the partnership that we have already signed with the Center of Criminal Investigative Support in São Paulo, so that in those crimes where the person's innocence is very obvious, we won't have to go through the bureaucracy of a criminal justification which precedes a criminal review, and the public prosecutor's office has used its powers to request the production of new evidence. And it was through that collaboration, we have here the co-directors of Innocence Project Brazil, that in 2024 we had emblematic victories. In February, Lucas Santos de Medoro went back home after having been unfairly convicted based on an illegal identification. And in May of the same year, the judgment that was really a shift in many paradigms. Carlos Edmilson da Silva, in a unanimous decision of this court, under the rapporteurship of Justice Hernando, we were able to put an end to 12 years of unfair arrest resulting from the conviction, a conviction that is caused by the contamination of memory in 12 different processes. We're going to talk more about the contamination of memory later. So once again, I thank you for the responsibility you have given us through this technical cooperation agreement, and I highlight the democratic openness of this court in giving a voice and the possibility of people who have been helped by the project, the people that effectively represent the suffering of having been convicted without having committed any crime, who will have the opportunity of addressing our public, our audience, the justices, and all law practitioners to share their journey and their perspectives as people who have been wrongfully in prison. All human rights matter, and nobody deserves to be arrested without having had committed any crime. Thank you very much.
Tem a palavra o doutor Luiz Lanfredi.
Dr. Luiz Lanfredi.
Excelentíssimo ministro Rogério Schietti Cruz.
Justice Rogério Schietti Cruz. For me to be sharing this panel with such important authorities that are so meaningful for the things that we are building in judiciary politics in Brazil. And I believe that represented by all of our panelists here, we should pay homage to all of you for your courage, for the challenges, and for the emphatic manner in which you have addressed this topic. And today, the population still resists in accepting it and in signifying it, especially when it comes to an uncritical training of law practitioners, as law has been taught in universities in a way that is not very discussed in terms of how this law is applied in police forces and within the criminal justice system, which causes us many times to reach the conclusion that we are enough and that we do not have but having this concern, to the perception of the fact that we fail because we're human, and even mistakes that are not intentional need to be avoided. And I'll talk about this, Justice Schietti, because we have here a huge problem in understanding, especially when it comes to judiciary policies. When they emerge, effectively, the dimension and potential for transformation as to how they incide on a daily basis in practice, in the world as it is. We currently are dealing with a real world that causes damages to people and that provides for injustice, and an injustice that is many times is sponsored by the state, which is the most violent or perhaps the most emblematic way that a person can be impacted in its honor, in its dignity, in its moral and personal patrimony. Thus, when this topic arises for the National Justice Council, we already had a trajectory, most of all related to ignoring a consolidated case law history that is born, most of all, from a very firm and courageous stand taken by yourself, Justice Schietti, when you started challenging the perspectives related to the logics of evidence. And many times a citizen will be taken through the balls of a court. Semantic action is that when you use standards where justice is fulfilled based on sterile reproductions. It was wonderful when she said, well, we should also congratulate Daniela.
Essa mesma terra adorada, Brasil,
it is the same golden land preserved that we want to, in a moment such as this, to bring equality, especially under the perspective that everyone has the same access to justice. And it is in that sense that when we come to the National Justice Council, when this topic came to us, we decided to create a working group that was emblematically known in the Council as perhaps one of the most numerous working groups that the Council has ever had, and that also has had many coordination challenges in and of itself.
Desta atividade, muitas vezes ela exige
execution of that activity required method, especially the synergy and the commitment of those who were part of that working group. And Justice Luis Fux was very welcoming to this topic, especially when it came to cases that were related to operational errors or errors in the actions taken by the judicial apparatus when it comes to a specific topic, the identification of authors. And this brought damages to the image of the very fulfillment of justice. We did not have a legal conceptual framework to follow. We had a scientific topic at hand, the theory of evidence, the theory that is underlying to the fulfillment of knowledge when it comes to the identification of authors. It is based on literature, and we often ignore those who have already studied this issue and gave a perspective to the scenario, and a scenario that had been absorbing everything that came from the academia and from the dedication of scholars, especially when it comes to flawed perceptions like personal comments done during the process and considered as absolute. And thus we broke with paradigms or situations that were taken as common sense in the past and norms that were listed as a standard. And I see that this working group, Justice, it originated a movement of 43 people. Like I said, it's an emblematic working group that is still famous in the National Justice Council. We are known as the 300 because we had the challenge of conducting our work using gender perspective and race perspective, and considering representation from all sectors of society. And we learn so much in that group permanently, continuously, with the lessons that the group taught to its members. Nobody there knew or dominated that absolute knowledge. Everyone there came to the working group without any preconceptions and very committed to the role we are playing. This group brings incidence perspectives that lead us to first understand the problem, then dialogue about the problem with the police forces, and also bringing that topic to current times, to the judiciary branch, a legislative programmatic perspective with our parliament, and also bringing new references for the academia. We wanted to work on all fronts, but of course, we weren't able to address everything, but it resulted in Resolution 484, published under the presidency of Justice Rosa Weber. And I'm very happy to be celebrating this event under the presidency of Justice Luiz Roberto Barroso. Just to say that this is not born out of a single justice that presided over the court. And it is not under the presidency of a single justice that this is currently becoming a policy. This is an ongoing process, a formative process. And here we bring to the seminar, first of all, cooperation of all contributions in the publications that emerge with this very appropriate action taken by the working group members, in a summary that brings the detailing and how this engineering was carried out by many hands. Most of all, when it comes to Resolution 484, Justice, and also addressing a little bit of our names here, based on the decisions made starting with the judicial turning point on this topic that bring the parameters that were consolidated in 484 and are the new beacon for the judicial action in guidelines the policy.
What is most elementary is what we decidedly wish to do. So that this resolution can not only have the intention of reaching everyone's knowledge and to be practiced by all. The grand finale hearing with justice, the grand finale, I mean a temporary one or an instantaneous one, but that does not for that reason end all possibilities of the subject, because for sure will certainly survive our passage here in consideration is the fact that we're also celebrating the creation of a lab, of a laboratory, a justice and reparations laboratory, where from these specific cases, these situations that didn't work out, that caused damage, that caused injustice, so that we can reevaluate them with a retroactive perspective of the composition of this trajectory, and trying to understand where and why and how this mistake took place so that it's never repeated. I think that here, Justice, all of this is very well done under your coordination. You were here the great conductor, maestro, that brought light to it so that we could review all of this case law, crystal law that was very stiff, and that gives us a new way to perceive of the penal conflict, especially that allowed us with absolute freedom and trust in the work to give wings to the imagination so that this dream of the actually viable justice could take place. So my thanks to you here, to all that participated of this working group, and here many that are present here following, especially a technical team from your cabinet, from the Department of Surveillance and Monitoring of the prison system, otherwise we would not, without which we would not have made any advances. So to say that this is a conquest of Brazilian society, and it cannot be any different to celebrate this if not in the citizens' court.
Para a condução dos trabalhos, tem a palavra o ministro
We have Justice Rogério Schietti Cruz. I just wanted to very quickly say that what is happening here is effectively fruit of a collective work of many people. I could maybe fix a time benchmark when Mr. Roberto Gito participated in a project of São Paulo called the Regra das Arcadas. We have students, professors, and also institutions such as representatives of an organization that we still have Dr. Cavalcanti, Flavia Howell, also the institution of the rights to defense. It was a magnificent experience because from there came an institutional demand so that we could review this case law, as mentioned. So we have a huge collaboration since then with my public servants, a very valuable team here presented by Dr. Luciano Moreno and Janaína Anchida, and also my colleagues in the court, if you want, she would be ahead of this. It's my Grand Chamber colleagues, my session colleagues, and the Council of Justice here with this great leader of good causes of judiciary, someone who really has been taking the forefront of opportunities so that we can transform our criminal justice that is still so lacking of a better physiognomy. And also with the sphere of the National Court of Justice, we have seen positive signs, and here I'll make a specific mention to dear Justice Edson Fachin, whose case law, especially in fundamental rights, has been absolutely important to consolidate what has been done in other spheres. This effort would be useless if we wouldn't have a consolidation of a work that is really collective. Civil society, public defenses, but give a real sense of the surveyor of justice, and also our doctor here with her sessions, and also we saw a transformation. It is necessary to overcome those historical issues that take us to very to accommodate to ourselves and maintain abusive practice, where we're comfortable with all kinds of institutional behaviors that bring us to this whole amount of things of inconstitutional issues. So all that participating here, I think we clearly have similar ideas, and I'm really happy to be here. And let's finish with art, because remembering now is art exists because life is not enough. So there's no point to deal on these subjects in a legal way if art does not help us to bring consciousness to what really matters in life. So it was really gratifying to have this wonderful surprise with Daniela Mercury singing our national anthem a cappella, perhaps one of the most emotional moments to see the national anthem sung with this energy and vocal beauty, a feeling that takes us to signify each word of our national anthem. So at this moment, I'd like to invite representatives of Brazilian art in what we have to offer, the best we have to offer. An installation we have outside, and it is called Shen, Care and Precautions, by artist Marcos Zacariades, that I discovered together with friends such as Dr. Walter Moura here in the city of Mucugê in a visit to wine vineyard, and a work of his was being exposed that he offered and implemented very far away from here in Taiwan. Is now here represented outside. I'm not going to say anything to not give any spoilers, because he's going to very soon explain how this installation and what its meaning is. We'll also have here a brief presentation, a teaser of the documentary Homicides Are Identified, fruit of a research conducted by Dr. Fernanda Amin and by Mikael Hockerman,
respectivamente, diretores de fotografia,
directors of photography, and documentary. They are very well recognized. They will soon be in the big screen. Okay, participate of the moment of birth at the very beginning of this research at the council. When Fernanda and Mikael were there to start the work of documenting that which is being done in regards to formal identification. And during these 3 years, I could follow some advances in this research. Dr. Fernanda Aminha also is doing a postdoctorate in the area of human rights in the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro. I'm certain that's going to be a huge success, because it's going to bring visual documentation and obviously also textualize of what we receive here in the court in forms of processes. So nothing better than art to show us reality, and reality that matters, or perhaps should be matter felt. So I invite here to the table Fernanda, Mikael, and Zacariades to present their work.
Good evening. I would like to acknowledge everyone present here today. And first, I would like to thank 2 people who are very important for this film. I'm very emotional because Daniela Mercury, who I'm a huge fan of, is crying because of my movie. So having her in front of me emotional, I started dancing because of her anyway. First, I'd like to thank Justice Rogério Schietti for inviting us to show this film here, and for the 3 years of support that he gave us. We wouldn't have been able to record in the spaces where we recorded and to be in the spaces where we were if it weren't for the Justice's support. I'd also like to thank Dr. Manfredi, who was always very kind to me and opened the doors of the National Justice Council to welcome us and talk to us whenever they had the availability. And I also like to thank 4 people who are fundamental for this story: Gustavo, Alberto, Giovanni, and Claudia, our main characters, and their families who opened their lives for us for 3 years so that we could follow their daily lives, their hardships, so that we could do this movie in the language that we wanted and the language that we thought was important to debate the story. And the Justice didn't really introduce the movie, but it is a film that tells the story of 4 black men who are proven to be innocent and had their lives turned upside down after being criminally identified based on a single photograph. It is a film that was born out of our perception that we will only raise awareness in society if we bet on new narratives and new ways of communicating. It is a film that, within that perspective of new narratives, we chose to talk about, to take a person-centric approach, to tell the stories of people who stop being people when they enter the judicial systems, that are turned into numbers and processes and have their stories completely erased, and they are bulldozed by the bureaucracy of our state. And these stories that exist in our film, I know that the film is called Reconhecidos, or Identified, but it's more than the stories of these people getting recognized as having committed crimes. These are stories that talk about our society, such an unequal, violent society from its inception, and us as the people who are responsible for this film. And I speak on my behalf and on Mikhail's behalf, the director of the film. We want this film to be seen time and time again. We want it to be debated, to raise awareness. We want it to be a mechanism to fight against prejudice, to fight against stigma, to bring society into the debate on the justice system. And I specifically believe that we are going through a very important time in our country. We are disputing what country do we want for the future, what society do we want for the future. If you want to be an inclusive society that dialogues, or if you want to be the country of hate speech, of violence, of rancor. And within that dispute of the project we want for the country, we want to make a contribution so that we can, in any way possible, build a more inclusive and democratic justice system. That's what I wanted to thank you, everybody, and I hope to see you in the movie theater next year. Thank you very much.
Tá certo. Bem, então agora vamos finalizar com o
Marcos Zacarias. Like I said before, he's responsible for this wonderful art exhibit that is just outside and that should be visited by all of us with a lot of respect, because his work has been internationally recognized. And I would also like to congratulate everyone for staying here over our allotted time. You are proving to be very committed to this topic. So, Zacarias, you have the floor. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for inviting me, Justice Rogério Schietti.
I am a visual artist. I live and I work in the Chapada Diamantina in the state of Bahia, where I developed an art and memory project. In 2007, I was invited. I was awarded by an American institution with an artistic residency in Taiwan. At the time, I studied the death penalty, more so in the US, Iran, and China. And when I asked the question, does Taiwan have the death penalty? And they told me, yes, it does. And I started to studying that topic and studying in Taiwan specifically. And when I went to get my visa from the Taiwan embassy, I read a message which was, according to the Chinese law, drug trafficking is punishable with the death penalty. And I, as an artist, would not make an exhibit about the death penalty in a place where this is socially accepted. But when I got that visa, I was somewhat allowed to talk about this topic because it was so obvious, it was made so obvious to me. And the first work in the exhibit, just in the entrance, was my visa, and this piece is called I Got a Visa. And with this quote or this warning, and I will talk about a cultural immersion that I did in Chapada Diamantina by the name of Perna das Almas. And this was mostly women who were covered in white sheets, and they trailed the illegal mining trails at night, playing and singing for people who had a very cruel death and sometimes an unfair death. And I started researching about the death penalty in Taiwan, and I came across a lecture by a Japanese person, and he would photograph only people in the death corridor. And in one of the pictures of the lecture, we have the picture of the execution chamber in Taiwan, where the convicted person, after having their last meal, they would kneel over this white sheet and get shot in the heart. And the white sheets of the souls that sing on behalf of people that suffered cruel deaths, and the sheets that receive the convicted person that will be executed. So the exhibit that I did there was called Complicities, and it was entirely made of sheets. These 18 folded sheets are folded, and there's a daylight, a blue light over them, because the execution in Taiwan always happens during the evening. And symbolically, while there's daylight, these sheets would not be used. And at the same time, a cultural conflict. In this exhibit, the intangible, that which was not material, was in the chants and in the images of the Terno das Almas ritual, and in the images of people who are in the death corridor. And I can even mention cases of death penalties for things that are not crimes, as is the case of relationships between people of the same sex, and also cases of Tibetan political activists in China, and other even more gruesome cases in Iran. This exhibit
had a very good reputation, and the Taiwanese Alliance for the End of the Death Penalty invited me to make a public installation about
da inocência de três rapazes
the defense of the innocence of three young men who in 1992 they were convicted to the death penalty based on very unsubstantial evidence, and it was a conviction that happened because the population was outraged due to a barbaric crime that had been committed, and they asked me to make an installation that would be a message to judges for them to be careful. And
eles passaram esses 10 anos, esse tempo preso, em que nenhum ministro
that time arrested, and meanwhile, no Minister of Justice signed their execution because of how unsubstantial the evidence was. And that's how I conceived this exhibit that took place in a huge avenue in Taipei. The installation was 300 colorful nests that symbolized life, when the people who and the people who walked by those nests, those old nests, people had to be careful. And that's the message that I had, that the judges had to be careful because they were dealing with life.
Esses três jovens,
inclusive men, and actually the president of Taiwan, Ma Ying-jeou, this man there, he went there to ratify his refusal in signing the execution of those young men because he...
porque foram exatamente ele dos 5 ministros. Ele esteve lá no dia.
One of the justices that was against the execution, and these men were in prison for 10 years.
Até que
until they were freed from prison, but they were still convicted.
Nessa apelação de 2007, a que eu estava lá na residência, ela foi mantida a liberdade.
The judgment that I was present at, they were allowed to be free, but they were still considered as convicted. And at the time, 15 years had passed and they were still being blamed by the brutal murder that happened.
Passar mais ou menos aqui, mais algumas fotos
dessa pictures of this installation.
Instalação pública. E apenas no ano de 2012.
Only in 2012, 20 years later, they were convicted to 20 years of imprisonment, and it was only in 2012 that the Taiwanese High Court recognized the judicial error, that they were free and considered as innocent. And to me, this installation, and I'd like to thank the justice for allowing me this space, because this piece of art is actually materialized. Because 14 years after having crossed oceans, this installation comes to Brazil, and the message to the justices and the judges has been given by anonymous passers-by. And here in Brazil, in my country, Right now, it is very timely that this message is being delivered to the judges of my country. So thank you.
Então, eu convido a todos
So I
a
invite
visitar
everyone to visit
caminharem com muito cuidado.
and for the judges to walk very carefully around it because we're dealing with lives. Thank you.
Vale aqui registro de agradecimento.
Well, I would like to thank Dr. Walter Moura for how sensitive he was. He was one of the people who idealized the coming of this artist to Brasilia, and it was a huge effort. They had to buy 300 eggs to build the egg nests just outside, so it's magnificent work. And I would like to, before concluding, I'd like to mention that from a documentary and procedure standpoint, we have the pleasure of announcing the publishing of the manual for the procedure of identifying persons according to resolution, and also the results of the working groups. So look at how many products and how many projects are being executed, and this is a really important process for us that we hope has a transformative ending. And I won't say anything else. I think we had a wonderful evening. Your presence here, the energy that is very present in this auditorium is magnificent. Thank you very much. Good evening. Ladies and gentlemen, we thank everyone for your participation, and we declare the first day of the International Seminar Evidence and Criminal Justice New Horizons for the Identification of Persons. We will the event tomorrow at 9 a.m. Have a wonderful